Welcome to another Clear Mountain interview. We're here with Ajahn Jotipalo, one of our older brother, friend, mentor, teacher monks. I've known Ajahn Jotipalo since probably maybe the first day or fairly soon after I came to Abhayagiri Monastery. So yeah, we're right now in British Columbia visiting Birken Buddhist Monastery, and Ajahn Jotipalo has agreed that we can interview him. So as we usually do, I'll read a quick biography. Ajahn Jotipalo was born in 1965 in Indiana. He received a BA from Wabash College and worked for 6 years in technical sales. Prior to ordination, Ajahn Jotipalo became interested in Theravada Buddhism after sitting several Goenka retreats, and lived for 1 year at a Hindu ashram called the Kripala Center in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and 1 year at the Insight Meditation Center Society, in Barre, Massachusetts. While on staff at the Insight Meditation Society, he met Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Punadhammo. After leaving IMS, he spent 3 months with Ajahn Punadhammo at the Arrow River Forest Hermitage in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. And after this, Ajahn Jotipalo came to live at Abhayagiri in 1998 and subsequently spent 2 years training as an Anagarika and Samanera. He finally ordained as a bhikkhu with Ajahn Pasano as preceptor on Ajahn Chah's birthday, June 17th in the year 2000. Since that time, Ajahn Jotipalo has stayed at Ajahn Chah branch monasteries in Thailand, Canada, and New Zealand. In 2018, Ajahn Jotipalo spent 1 semester as a visiting fellow studying...
Full year.
A full year, okay. Spent a full year as visiting fellow studying iconography at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. For the last 3 years, Ajahn Jotipalo has been living with Ajahn Sona at Birken Monastery in British Columbia, where we are now. Ajahn, thank you so much for agreeing to...
My pleasure. Yeah. So it wasn't a full year, it was a full academic year. So it was like 8 months.
Okay.
That was there.
Well, that might be a nice place to start. That's something which most Theravada monks, certainly American Theravada monks, don't have much experience with. That is this overlap of the generative aspect, or even the artistic aspect and the artistic outlet of being a monk. And I'd be curious to hear more about either how that impulse has manifested in you. I know on your webpage, the Icon Yukon webpage, you talk a little bit about starting up art again after taking a bit of a break when you first ordained. But yeah, maybe you could give us a bit of that history.
Right. One of my cohorts in the very first Icon retreat that I did was Ajahn Kovilo. He sat, I think he went just to chaperone me, but or did you go because you were interested?
I did go. I painted at St. Gabriel.
Yeah. One of us did Gabriel, one of us did Michael, I forget. I think you did Michael and I did Gabriel. Actually, I was an art major in college, and it was a liberal arts education, so it was more like you know art history, or how to talk about how to communicate, and using art as a medium. I never intended it to be like a profession. I never wanted to be a professional artist, depend on that for survival. Basically, though, after college, I really didn't do much painting. I did do a series of 10 paintings about whitewater kayaking that I thought came out, really, really well. But then when I discovered monasticism and just meditation in general, that kind of interest died. And it wasn't until I was actually in the monastery, I think I'm guessing it was around my 4th or 5th Vasa, and I actually decided to pick up just doing painting as a way of to keep engaged. But what I did is I decided, like when I was an art major, I never got into really good drawing. I was never really good at drawing, and I never got into, like, say, portrait painting. So I had this idea of to actually study what it's like to learn something. So I just decided I'm going to just keep practicing doing portrait drawings and paintings of Ajahn Chah. I just took one image of Ajahn Chah, kind of the famous one that, is kind of young Ajahn Chah, and I just kept painting it over and over and over again until I got to where I could do it 95% of the time accurately. And here's we can show later up the script. But here's, like, I was using this really kind of cheap fabric paint, and But I just kept doing it over and over again until I felt like, yeah, I was proficient at it. And then I lost interest, you know, and it was what I talk about to people, it's like, it was actually sort of putting forth right effort, learning how I learned a new skill and just paying attention to the effort it took to do it. So a lot of it was like, you just started seeing the moods of the mind. Like some days I'd just really be interested and I'd paint or draw or paint for 5 or 6 hours. And other days I'd sit down and I wouldn't want to do it at all. But because I made a determination, no, every day you do this, even if it was only for like a half hour, I would sit down and do it. And then there'd be certain days where like all I would do would be to clean my paintbrushes. And I remember one of my professors in college told me, he said, never leave the studio feeling bad. He said, always try to, and this is a good way to, like, for meditation too, like never leave a meditation when you're feeling bad. And so even if the meditation was bad, you brought up bad memory or something, you can dedicate the merit at the end of that to your loved ones, to your friends, or someone you know is in need. You can just having that aspiration, like, okay, if any goodness came from this today, I dedicate this to my best friend. And then you can feel good about that. The rest of the meditation may have been a disaster, but you can feel good about that last bit. The way I tell the story is that we were on a winter retreat, and it was, you know how Ajahn Pasno and Ajahn Amaro would have it, where we do like 2 week, where we have like, you know, full practice and then half practice and then just unstructured. And we were in the middle of an unstructured period, and for some reason it was like the best week, the best day of weather, and it was like, you know, mid-60s, and I did walking meditation all day long. I used to love walking meditation, so I was just doing walking meditation. And just as it started getting in the evening, I went and sat down in my cabin for a cup of tea, and I was ready to fall asleep. I was just, you know, falling asleep, and I was like, oh, it was like part of me saying, go lay down, but I was just like, I don't want to fall asleep at like 6 in the afternoon because I'll be up at midnight, and then it just throw my whole schedule off. So I was like, I got to do something. So I was like, well, if I read a book, I'm going to fall asleep. If I can't go out and do walking meditation, I'm already too tired from that. And all of a sudden I remembered, oh, I have 4 drawings of Ajahn Chah that I started many years before. Ajahn Yaniko and I were reading about Native American spirituality at that point, and I had these, this vision just popped in my head. I'm going to do 4 paintings of the Native American Lakota colors: red, black, white, and yellow. I'm going to do 4 Buddha images in those colors, and so I could see it clearly in my mind how to do it. So I changed the drawings a little bit, and I started drawing. This was 6 in the afternoon. I started painting. And I looked down, and all 4 paintings were completely finished. I hadn't got up to drink the water. I hadn't done anything. I had just painted. I looked over. It was 3 in the morning. So like 9 hours had gone just like that. I was wide awake, you know, not tired at all. And so I went and sat in meditation until dawn, and then I went down. And I told Ajahn Pasno about this. I said, that just explained what happened. He goes, that's not insignificant. Pay attention to that. And so I decided to pick it up again, to start painting. And it was very shortly after that Ajahn Punadhammo was visiting Abhayagiri, and he's Ukrainian by his ancestry. So we took him over to visit Father Damien. And at that point I had been studying a lot about, you know, artwork at that point, I guess. And there was a teacher at Spirit Rock, Wes Nisker. He used to do a radio program. He always ended his radio program. I never heard it, but I heard this joke. But he said, if you don't like the news, go out and make your own. And so I kind of felt like when I was looking at all the various artwork, Buddhist artwork, none of it spoke to me. Like Tibetan artwork, I appreciated it, but it didn't speak to me. Japanese, I didn't appreciate, didn't understand it, so it didn't speak to me. And, you know, the stuff I saw in the West that was happening just didn't speak to me either, even though it was Western artists and stuff. It just didn't speak to me. So I was like, oh, I need to start creating my own. So I was doing a lot of research and studying about art. And then we went over to show Ajahn Punadhammo the monastery there, and Father Damien, the abbot, gave all of us a tour. And I must have asked one too many very specific questions, you know, like, because I remember what it was there was one of the angels had this sort of something in their halo or something like that.
This is on his icons.
Yeah, on his icons, yeah. And he had painted, and they had some sort of like blue band on it or something. And I was like, what's that all about? And he just looked at me, and he said it was a royal insignia that in Rome that would have signified someone was a postal carrier. So these were angels who were intermediary angels that you know, would speak. So it was his way of sort of portraying that, which I guess can be common in iconography. But then, you know, after I asked that question, and two or three are very pointed, like, hey, "Are you an artist?" And I was like, "Well, I'm studying art." He goes, "Well, I'm doing an icon painting next week. Do you want to come?" And Ajahn Kovilo was like, "Yeah, go for it, go for it." That was about 5 years ago, though. I kind of realized the iconography painting, like the only time I really had to do it, because when I do it, I think I was describing to you guys the other day, when I would come back to my cabin after our evening puja, if I picked up my paintbrush, it was like flipping on a switch. And I knew I would be awake for another 3 to 5 hours. And so it's like, well, do I want to be up until 1 or 2 in the morning? And actually, so when I started this whole process, I made some really strong determinations with myself, is that I knew I would get, you know, absorbed into the process, and timelessness just overtakes you, but I made this determination, like, I will not miss any communal activities. So like, if, you know, I won't, you know, miss morning pujas, I won't miss meetings, and that was really strong determination about that. So that means if you're up till 1 o'clock at night, but you got to get up at 5 for morning puja, 5:30, it's like, what's going to give? Sleep or health, or are you going to paint? And so I gave up my health to do this, and so I, you know, it was like, so that was the trade-off. And so but after doing that for a year or two, I kind of realized, no, I need to make some changes, and was investigating some options, and then this thing with Collegeville, you know, came available, and so and partly, I mean, the proposal that I made to Collegeville, and it was what I was there studying, was, you know, how can I take this tradition that Father Damien taught us how to do, you know, how can I take that and then incorporate it into Buddhist language? How can a Buddhist take this Christian language of iconography and tell Buddhist stories? And so what I discovered when I was like really getting into it is that the reason Tibetan artwork and the reason Zen artwork didn't speak to me is I didn't speak the language. It's you know, Zen. If you sent me that really nice book about, you know, Tibetan iconography, and it's, you know, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages, just like, you know, if a Tibetan painting, if the person's holding their hand this, it means this particular teaching. If they're doing this, it means another teaching. And I met this in Sebastopol. There was a monk there who was painting this 2-story tall Thangka painting. And I asked him, I said, what do you see when you look at this? I was overwhelmed with just the joy of looking at this huge Thangka. He said, fear. And I was like, what do you mean fear? And he said, well, 2 reasons. He said, one is it's public. He was, you know, kind of doing it for educational purposes. He says, you know, a crazy person could come in here and just throw coffee on it or ruin it, you know. So he saw how attached he was to it. But the other one is he really believes that it is a teaching instrument, and like if he's supposed to paint the icon like this and he paints it like that, it could actually interfere with someone's enlightenment. St. John's is more, it's not part of, say, the Eastern Orthodox Church, so it's like icons don't mean anything to them, really. And they had a couple of icons out one day for a feast day out in their hallway where the monks enter, because I would pray with the monks. I'd go in every day with them and sit in the choir with them. And what happened was that they had one of these icons out front, and I came over and I was looking at it, and one of the monks there, because like they don't speak that language either, because you grow up studying the iconography and the language that it tells, and he said, what are you looking at? I said, I'm just totally amazed that you have an Adenhart icon. He goes, you know who painted it? But I had this idea. I wrote to him and I said, is it appropriate for a Buddhist monk to be using Christian iconography language to, you know, tell a Buddhist story? And he wrote back, he says, well, actually the process itself is neutral. It's just a language. He says, you just have to determine if the stories you are telling are, if painting, you know, doing it through a painting is the best way to convey the language. So I was really impressed, you know, with that open-mindedness. You know, it's like the language itself is neutral. It's the story you want to tell.
Ajahn, thank you. You know, bringing up the image of the angel with the, which angel was it with the blue? I think think it was Gabriel.
Gabriel,
Yeah.
who had the blue kind of messenger's crown. And what I find interesting about that is so often the creative muse is kind of portrayed as this a messenger from heaven, basically, come to give you something. And for those who have really engaged and felt inspired by art, I think there is that sense of something's been given you and it brightens the heart. Ajahn Kovilo was involved in compiling a book called Paths to Pamoja, or Joy, which, you know, are these paths towards brightening the mind so that it can settle into meditation. And I'm curious, Ajahn, what you would say about, you know, in the Theravada we don't, you know, we have a lot of language for analytically moving through the states of the mind, but that language that is semi-poetic, that seems to touch on some sort of, you know, whatever art taps into, and that brightening influence for those who are inclined towards it. And I think that can be really important for some people. So I'm curious, how do you see, what advice would you have towards practitioners who find maybe their practice is a bit dry, or they're, you know, in terms of brightening, and how would they incorporate this insight into their own lives as practitioners?
Right. After I did that first icon workshop with Father Damien, I gave a series of 3 talks there. I think they're still on Abhayagiri's website, called The Artist Way, 1, 2, and 3. And as is often the case, like, you know, especially when you're a junior monk at Abhayagiri, if you're giving a talk, you might get 1 or 2 people commenting about the talk, or, you know, a layperson comes up to you maybe once and asks, "What did you mean by that?" You know, clarification. After I gave those talks, I had probably like 30 people come up to me and say, "I've never heard a monk talk about that before." You know, it's like, that's how I see the world. You know, and I've never heard anybody talk about it. So I can't remember what the 3 categories. I was trying to tell this to someone the other day, and I need to put my head back into it and think about it. But I said there were 3 personality types. So one would be like someone who's like totally intellectual, you know, who's maybe like book smarts. There's people who are creative, like musicians or artists, and then there was a third, and I forget what type I would consider that to be. But and so I feel like what I used to say is, at the time it was like all of the talks we give at Abhayagiri, or if you read Dhamma books, or just basically Dhamma talks anywhere online, it seems like it's coming from the intellectual aspect of it. People do tell their own personal stories, and, you know, we can use anecdotes, and you know, we relate to it in different ways other than just, say, reciting the suttas, but it seems to be more analytical. Whereas, you know, with the artwork, it was, you know, it was obviously approaching it from a way that, and I was talking about too, like, you know, how it affects my mind and how it affects my meditation, and that's what I think people were more, to me, it's like the finished product. I could, I think Ajahn Kovilo has the largest Jotipalo collection of paintings, and they were all ones he pulled out of the garbage. and
Take more.
It's that process of making it, what happens in the mind, the energy I get, the repetitiveness of it, the discipline of it, and so that's what kind of excites me. But what I realized, though, is like, when we teach lay people, we're almost always coming from the intellectual side, but yet the training we received as Buddhist monks is almost entirely from the creative side. Like, when you're in Thailand, you learn how to make your broom that you clean your cabin with. There's a huge emphasis on how clean your cabin is. Like, every day you polish the floor with a coconut husk. You know, we sew our own robes. It's just, every aspect of the monastic training is around creativity. Every aspect of it. And I was just like, so that's weird. Like, we don't even appreciate the creativity aspect of our own training, but we do it almost continually. But when we teach, we don't teach that at all.
Ajahn, I'm curious, like, hearing about how much energy, like, and how much joy it brings up for you. Of course, you had joy, piti, and energy, virya. These are some of the 7 factors of awakening.
Right.
I'm curious if you've found that your icon painting, either the process or even the larger effect that the painting has on your life as a whole throughout, if you're painting for however many hours a day, or making videos for however many hours a day, even the radiant effect from that might have on your development of some of these other path factors. So it brings up energy, but how does it affect your mindfulness, your sati, or your samadhi?
Right. I don't know if I know how to answer it. Yeah. How would you see it? I mean, you guys have watched me. You've seen how it's going. What would you think?
I think some of the, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I mean, I think when that piti comes up, the energy, and you rest in kind of that brightness, or virya comes up, the energy, and it leads to this sense of rapture and really getting involved in something and feeling brightened by it. When you put down the brush, there's this afterglow of tranquility, passaddhi. I mean, right. For me, yeah, I see like whatever kind of high frequency energy that needs to be expressed. After it's expressed, there's, I would imagine, you know, at least I think I see that in you, Ajahn, and certainly in myself, is that there is a settling that's also bright at the same time.